Hello, this is a video to help you become familiar with Hytale Early Access's Worldgen V2 Cave Generation. In this video, I will go over the node editor for Hytale's world generation and break down the terrain generation system that allows this form of cave system to be made. This video assumes that you have familiarity enough to create this form of world in Hytale. If you do not know how to get your world to look like this on the surface, then I recommend you check the description of this video, where I will include a link to another YouTuber who goes through the basics of how to manipulate the files and set up what is effectively a mod for Hytale so that you can regenerate your world to look like this. Also in the description will be a link to Hytale's world generation GitHub page, where you can get many further details and much more specific details regarding the nodes that we are going to discuss. I will be assuming some familiarity with things like 2D simplex noise. This is more to break down the larger components that go into making this system. So let us get started. So to begin, every underground needs an overground, or on-ground. And what we see here is the terrain that is generated primarily by the Hytale's basic biome. So I've made minimal adjustments to this. I had just been messing around with it myself. But for the most part, what makes all of what I'm going to call hills or mountains is this base set of nodes. So everything here, except for this import density, I'll make this a bit bigger, is in this basic JSON file and is the basic biome. So what we first have to understand is, what does this do? And I'm going to go over this moderately quickly. I believe most of it is covered in the video I've linked in the description. But we have simplex 2D noise that is generating values between positive and negative 1 for all xz values. And we get whether something is a block, a value between positive and negative 1 for the y values from the curve mapper density. The curve mapper density takes in basically a height value from the base height density node. The base height density node refers to a base height name, again, can be seen from the previous video, where this is reading a number from another file that has a value for base. I believe that value is 100. And then it returns a difference from base. So base is 100. If this asks what is the height value of block at 101 y, this responds 1. If it is at y value 99, this responds -1. So this, for every xz value, the curve mapper density has basically a line from all positive values and all negative values, realistically going to the world height and world base, with 0 at wherever base is defined. It takes those values and puts it into a manual curve. The manual curve is a linear interpolation function that makes what is effectively a multi-segment continuous function out of any given points. The manual curve in this case is taking the value of 0, it will always respond 1, and for the value of 50, it will always respond -1. And then for everything between 0, remember that is base height, so 100 blocks above the bottom of the world, it will return solid. And for everything 50 blocks above 100 blocks above, so everything at 150, it will always be air. And then everything between then becomes the dynamic mountain range base, and the height of the mountains is what gets defined by the simplex noise. So the sum density sums the simplex noise 2D, which is generally either 1 or minus 1. That is wrong. The simplex noise is providing values from positive or to minus 1, and that is a continuous function, but Hytale only generates a block if something is 0 or greater, and always generates empty, and that's all defined by the solid material provider, when the value is less than 0. So if we were to just do simplex noise, let us save this, we would see these very large pillars being created. And mostly I bring this up because knowing how this looks will be important for later, just to provide a better idea of what noise looks like. Let's shrink down that scale so it's very textured. I don't really know how else to say, but it does just become these vertical columns. And it is only when we mix that with the y values, we sum them together, that this is all very small scale, that it becomes mountainous. And then changing the scale again, it all generates back into the mountains. So that is the above ground. I only bring that up despite the previous video covering it, not previous, but one in the description, covering it because it is so integral to what we will be doing downstairs. Many of you may have noticed I had an extra node here. What does this do? Well, this imports a density from another file. That density was given a name plains1 cave terrain, and then underscore copy because I've made a copy of it. So when we connect that in to our min density function, which is min density is always asking for air instead of blocks, suddenly we go from everything being, just air above ground to now we are replacing the underground solid stuff with the underground air. And we save and move back, and then the caves generate. Just for reference, I'm using viewpoint size of 5 so that we can see the snaking caves. A view size of 2 would probably not give us a full impression of what the insides look like. So we can get large caves, caverns, and we can also get what is referred to as, I guess, snakes. Thinking that that specifically generates from the snake bit is a little bit misleading, but in all, we will get, I'll drop down to adventure, and from there we can see that there are just caves breaching the surface at various points, because it is choosing the air that is generated by the caves algorithm. And so your player would be able to drop down into caverns. So let us begin looking at and then breaking down the caves by their parts. This imported density has to come from somewhere, and surprise, surprise, this is where the Hytale is, the mod is. So we have our mod folder, we have server, we have Hytale generator. We were working out of the biomes function, our biomes JSON file. Now we can go into the density JSON file. This is just a variety of density functions. The primary one we're looking at is this plains1 cave terrain copy, which is a copy of plains1 cave terrain, just because I make copies of them. So let us open that up. Okay, first I'm going to disconnect this, save, and then show y'all what happens when we prioritize the caves portion. If the basic biome is not generating a surface area, not providing everything above a certain point is air, then the caves will generate solid material all the way up. Otherwise the caves would arbitrarily cut off mountains above themselves. And so at this point, we can see that some of these caves are going basically above the peaks of the otherwise hills. Anything that goes above here has a chance of reaching the surface and becoming an entry point for a player. Okay, so now that we have it only generating the caves, we will investigate what the caves are. So we have this imported density, plains cave terrain. So we file, open, go from basic density to the caves file. Here we are. This is how Hytale generates caves. I'll go through this part by part. Let us start on the left and then work our way right. So root cache density. This is the component that exports the plains cave terrain copy. That is how we can refer to all of this with just a single node in another file. Mixed density, I'll get to that in a bit. Max density, take the solid of stuff we will get to in a bit. To start, I will disconnect the ceilings, walls, and cavern ceilings, and we can just get to what is the snake floors. This looks very similar to what we've just gone over for the surface hills. Well, you'll see in a moment, but that's not very surprising. We have curve points, manual curve, and base height density. And then we have an imported density and an inverter. Just to mention, the imported density just comes from here. Yeah, export as mountain cave snakes. So you can just think of this node as being simplex 2D noise density. That those are using the same thing. And then there is an inverter. Let us take a look at what I've disconnected the ceilings, walls, and cavern ceilings. Save. Go back to the world. Alright, so now we go and explore what caves have been generated. And, well, these don't look like caves. These just look like mountains that are lower to the ground. Well, that's not very surprising because we've already seen how to make mountains. The nodes are just mountains, but lower. Because if we look, so we have this portion, which is combining with our simplex noise, this one, through here, and creating mountains for us, as we saw in the basic file on the surface everywhere, that each xz value is getting combined with a height-based value, and then where the 2D noise is the highest, we get the highest mountains, up to the limits or within the constraints defined by this manual curve. The block on top is being produced by this, which we will get to in a bit. It's all being mixed together. Functionally, it is just mountains underground, or what we would generally consider below whatever sea level we have. That's not a cave. That's just a different mountain range. So how do we create caves? Well, let us connect this back up and then disconnect ceilings. And first, let us just see what the snake ceilings and snake walls make. And this is something else. Very interesting to look at. Looks a lot like stalactites. And they generally go up to approximately the surface. Eventually, they run into that stone block that was generating at the surface level. What do we do with this? How is this made? Let us start with snake ceilings. Snake ceilings are just the ceilings. If we disconnect mix density and connect the sum density right to the min density function, basically bypassing snake walls and getting just snake ceilings, we can get this upside down mountain range. Well, that is cool, but that is not the stalactiteness that we were just shown. So let's look at, well, briefly how this upside down mountain is made. So the mountains are upside down because this curve point system is upside down. Whereas here we had the in minus 90 is always solid and 60 above is always air. Here we have underground is always air and above ground is always solid. That means that when it combines with the 2D density are added to increasingly negative numbers and therefore becoming air, and the higher y values are added with increasingly positive values and therefore become solid, therefore mountains. Let us connect these again and discuss the mixed density function. The mixed density function, or node, takes 3 inputs, and for specific clarification, concise reference, again, GitHub is in the description. The mixed node accepts 3 inputs: A from the sum density, B from the constant density, and then a mixing value, which is considered the snake walls. So mixing doesn't sum, it does not average, it does not median, it mixes. And the precise mixing, the amount of A plus B, or A minus B, or whatever, is performed by this mixing value. So what we end up with is 2 systems, 2 density functions, upside down mountains, and constant being stone, that are intermixed in various parts. Let us go step by step through the snake walls. We start with a simplex noise 2D density function. That creates that vertical, textured, like camo looking floor to ceiling of world generation pillars. Almost maze, but it's not. So this is producing values from positive to -1. We take the absolute value of that. Okay, now we have values from +1 to 0. Then we normalize the density. So we say from 0 to 1, squish that all in a little bit, and make it 0.3 to 1. So values at 0.0 become 0.3, values at 1.0 stay 1.0, values at 0.5 become 0.65. So everything is shifted up a bit, with the lesser values becoming greater the most, and the greatest values barely moving at all. Then we take a power function and take all of those densities to the third power. Every column, we've gone from +1 -1 to +1 0.3, and now we are making it +1 to 0.027. 0.3 to the third power, 0.027. Now, you might be asking, why would we do that if we've just gone through the effort? Doesn't that basically bring it back down to 0.0? And the answer is no, because the higher values barely change. The value 0.5 in the 0.0 to 1.0 range would have become 0.65, which now becomes 0.27. So it's manipulating the curves that we are using. The normalizing density takes what was this line and turns it into 0.3. I'm just approximating here. And goes there instead of full 0 to 1. And then we get another curve once the power function goes that does cross 0. All right, let's make this red, but looks something like this. I'm no math professor, so it's not going to be exact here. but the values very quickly drop off and then pretty quickly taper out again. This is the kind of effect that we're getting from this mixing function. In effect, the mixing density mixes between the normal mountain generation and this constant block generation. If the mix was always 1, then we would just have solid blocks everywhere. If the mix was always 0, then we would have this normal mountain generation. So because the curve, the mixing value that we are using, is now so much more in the 0 area, we get an emphasis on the mountain generation as opposed to the constant density, always stone generation. Now you might be saying, well, we just spent all this time. What's wrong with the mountains that we had? We just spent all of this effort to still mostly use the mountains? Well, you have to remember that this portion of the graph, you have to consider that this portion of the graph, while not a huge component of the material, of the density function of its range, has a drastic effect on how the terrain will generate. So maybe this is all better demonstrated visually. I know some people learn visually. So it all goes from this upside down mountain to the spires, because various peaks and attributes that were part of the mountains are being exaggerated. They're being dripped downwards. They're avoiding the pressure, the density that was encouraging them to taper off as they approached the lower levels. So the become air as they approach -80 now becomes overwritten in some areas by the snake walls. And so you get kind of the drawdown. And the drawdown is sharp because of the power density kind of being this very steep area, but also because of the absolute value that originally took our 2D noise from here to here. So all of these are somewhat sharp, they are V-shaped stalactites and not very curved. I mean, they're somewhat curved, as is the nature of a block game. But so how does this influence the rest of the generation? Well, we've already talked about how the floors generate, so let's add the floors back in. And we are taking the maximum density of those two attributes, those two density functions. So we have the floors combined with the solid of the ceilings and walls. And now, okay, cave is generating into me. Now already we have snakes everywhere. And if this is what you want out of your cave generation, that's great. You have underground caves of varying Y levels and going up and going down and having these odd, very narrow channels and these somewhat open areas and just a wild variation of the different effects. Some of them, again, do reach up to surface level to reach the edge. Well, maybe not in this case, but that is just procedural generation not happening to do it because we have this giant stone block above us that is still extending up to maximum world height. That is 2 out of 3 parts. So what is the third part? Well, let's jump back into the editor and look at cavern ceilings. Cavern ceilings, well, we've seen this before. Manual curve with curve points, base height, curve mapper, simplex 2D noise, summit. What is this manual curve, though? The manual curve is saying 10 blocks below base level, we are always solid, but 60 blocks below the base level, we are always air. And I'll just disconnect this and this for a moment. So we are getting mountain generation, but we have this giant open area. Now hold on a minute. We already had this giant open area when we did the cavern ceilings, or was it snake ceilings? Yeah, we already had this giant open area when we did the snake ceilings. Well, that was getting mixed with the walls, but we're doing the minimum density between these two portions. So, and I haven't saved it yet, all of this will be air, is what we're saying. But also, whatever the ceilings and walls conspire to make as air will also be air. So now we get these high peaks with limited spires. None of them reach the ground. Nothing from the ground reaches too far up. That's not what we're looking for yet. You know, sure, we have some areas reaching up to about surface, and in fact, we can just barely peek in, but we don't have our floor. Well, what do you know? We have snake floor. Add that back in, and everything returns to the cave generation as it should be. The snake floors forces anything that would be the floor to become solid again. And so we get this single large open area, but we also get all of the snaking tunnels that we were looking at before. And then, you know, they reach up as we had seen earlier. All of this cave generation, again, gets mixed with this make stuff solid constant density. And what is this constant density saying? I've reordered these at some point during my editing. This is saying that, okay, so we have all of these caves, and the caves are air in some places, except for where the floors say that they should be solid, and that's all fine, but we want stuff to be solid otherwise. So we have this additional mixing function that prioritizes solid blocks, you know, makes the density solid, wherever the mixing value becomes 1. Well, where does it become 1? 60 blocks above base, 90 blocks below base. And it is only during the 50 blocks above base and minus 80 blocks above base that we get this cave system. So with this, we can determine how high or how low our caves generate, their maximum extents. And then, because everything above 60 is being mixed to be stone, we get stone. In fact, let's test that. Remove the 60. So now the manual curve tops out at 50, becoming air, or remaining as air. This has continued to be solid, and I'm pretty sure that it's because of this bit, no, this one, that makes everything above 70 blocks above base also solid. So all of these things are wildly intertwined, and I think that is one of the complexities with dealing with this node system at times. We can add that back in. Apparently it's not doing much. It is probably a good practice to set up something like this to force the areas you want to be solid when you want them to be. We get our caves can generate between plus 50 to minus 80 relative to base. It will prefer the max density. Otherwise, it will start to use the constant density whenever reasonable. Mix it towards more stone as it goes up. And then we export all of that as planes 1 caves terrain copy, which I have here. The underscore copy was just something I added. So now that we have all of that, now we can go back into our previous biome definition file. View here. We've imported the density, and this was running the entire time we were exploring how all of that cave generation was done. And now we can sum back or add back in the sum of our surface level cave generation or mountain generation. Importantly, we have the min density so that we can remove that giant block that is sitting on the surface. Because while that is useful for the caves, say what we're doing now is carving mountains out of this block. And we will return to our usually generated terrain. So let us look around here again, just as we did at the beginning, and we can see that we have a cave. This is a very small bit. We have a cave. And some parts of it go up and some parts of it go down. And if we go down far enough, then we get into the caverns that were created. Alright everyone, I think that's it for this video. I mean, I'm not going into adding blocks, I'm not going into adding anything else. This is really just a breakdown of the individual components that create these channels through the ground and create interesting underground gameplay. That's not strip mining everywhere. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget that you can reference things in the description. The Wikipedia was very helpful to me. Sorry, not Wikipedia, GitHub was very helpful to me in understanding the mixing function because honestly, I thought it averaged, I thought it summed, I thought it took a median. It wasn't until that said 3 inputs and defined what was high, what was low, that it all started to make more sense. If you want to experiment yourself with Hytale's generation, again, you can explore or set up a world like this through that video in the description, and then really just open up the node editor, start connecting and disconnecting blocks. You start to get a feel for what parts you can/should bypass in order to see or isolate a particular portion of generation. And yeah, have a good time. If you like the video, please give it a like. If you want more of this content, feel free to recommend what type of stuff I should learn and break down for you. Would you like your videos to be more breakdown oriented, or would you want them to be more I've made this thing and here's how I did it? Let me know. Have a good day.